If our sound guy did this right, we should be able to hear me. Okay. I'm going to start things off by asking you to indulge us. I'm John Steele, the president of the Historic Church Conservancy, and we are the owner of this building, a nonprofit. And we also are the operators of what some of you know as the Steeple Event and Conference Center, which we make ends meet to keep the historic building going by doing all kinds of events here. And this is one of our favorite kinds. We love the history part because that's kind of what we're about too. So before we get started with your program, I wanted you to share with us the opportunity to honor Dan Meeks. We've got a special presentation for him because he's put together an incredible media system. Dan, would you come up here? We're going to be Indian givers here and give this to you, but it's a little plaque honoring your efforts to put together probably the best media system in the whole town. And it's got a picture of Dan and his wife there with the media booth and everything. But then we're going to grab it back and post it on the side of the building.
Oh!
Or not the building, but the media center. So
Now, I must say something about the Presbyterian Church, is as you walk around the church, everything that's been renovated or donated or whatever, there's a plaque on their thing. So it's almost a history lesson. Speaker was talking about.
So in keeping with tradition.
So going with that. Is that the best picture of me that you have? Oh,
It's pretty flattering, actually.
well, thank you so much.
So if you want, we'll leave this on the piano. You can take a closer look at it at the end of the program, but then we're going to swipe it back.
Okay. Well, thank you
Thanks,
so
Dan.
much.
Betsy, you're up.
For those that don't know, I'm Betsy Denny. I'm the current president of Fremont County Historical Society. And I want to welcome everybody today. If you have not signed in, we would like for you to go ahead and sign in sometime back there where Cindy is sitting. This kind of gives us an idea of who all comes and how well our programs are. So before we get started and before I make introductions, I've got a couple of things that I want to announce. It's getting springtime, and with springtime comes a lot of activities that are going on. And so please, if you're into history and that kind of stuff, there are a lot of things that are coming up. I encourage you to get out and attend some of these things. This next week, the PCC Mini College is up and running after a 3-year hiatus, and so there are a lot of programs out there. I don't know if there's any openings, but it's always a fun time. So you can always find something there to that you enjoy. And it's open to the public. We do have, we will be out there on Tuesday for, I don't know what it is, whether it's the Author's Day but we will have a booth there. I do know that. And then they will have other activities on Wednesday and Thursday also. So if you get a chance, run out there. It's a great time. And then remember next year and sign up if you haven't this year. Also, Western Fremont Historical Society, which I am part of, is holding their annual meeting April 1st at the Coaldale Community Building there in Coaldale, a historic site. We will have a short program there also. Everybody is encouraged to come. Of course, we would love to have people become members. Along with, if you're not a member of Fremont County Historical Society, we encourage you to do that. Also, that gives you an upcoming newsletter that tells us all of the activities that are going on, and a little bit of history of Fremont County. So we encourage all of that. Next program in May, we will not be here. Double booked is what I understand, which is fine. So our program on silent movies will be held out at the 4 Mile Community Club. And that is out on Steinmeier and something. Highway 50, yeah. It's the stoplight that goes to Walmart. You take a right. Instead of going to Walmart, you go the other way, and it's right there. Just keep that in mind. We'll have that in the announcements. So I think that's all of the announcements I have. Today, we have Gregory Howell here, and he is going to talk about a building down there in Pueblo that if you have not had the opportunity to tour, we're going to have to talk again. It's a wonderful, wonderful building. And Gregory's going to talk about the family that had this building for years and years and years. And so I know it's going to be great. I've listened to Gregory before, and he's just wonderful. So welcome, Gregory.
Thank you. Make sure that the sound is okay for everyone. Well, thank you for the Fremont County Historical Society for giving me the opportunity. This presentation has grown and grown over the last few years. And what started as a very local story, just like many other stories, the more you research, the more you dig into the individuals and the stories behind the stories, all of a sudden all these other communities start to come into the stories. And this story really started with steel and meat, the two industries that really powered a lot of the early growth and development in this part of the country. But I've also learned lots of stories, and in fact, just a few minutes ago, I heard a little story about the stained glass window here, which stories are that it quite possibly could be from Tiffany's. And I just started a project in Pueblo at the First Presbyterian Church. Louis Tiffany actually supervised himself the stained glass windows that are in the First Presbyterian Church, and I'm preparing to go back to New York to dig into the archives because there are other Tiffany windows and other things that were produced by Tiffany. So I'm going to fold this church's Tiffany and see if we can pull that in, because I'd love for there to be a more comprehensive look at Tiffany in southern Colorado, and people could make it an actual tour of a lot of the different communities, because it's an extraordinary story in its own right. But just learning this just now and seeing the window, you know, without doing any research, it would be wonderful if that could be pulled in to the actual story. So that's kind of how all of these stories evolve. So for me, I came to Pueblo and to this part of the country about 12 years ago. It was a team of doctors that were starting a very innovative practice. And in fact, we opened up 8 clinics in 18 months from the ground up. Actually, one here in Canyon City. So just when you come into Canyon City, where the Chili's restaurant is, and so it was originally Rocky Mountain Vein Institute. It's now American Vein and Vascular. I was their first director of creative solutions. So my job was to go to all of these different 8 communities. So it was Pueblo, Canyon City, it was Vail, it was Parker, Colorado Springs, Denver. And for someone who just arrived, and I grew up in Japan, and it was actually a team of doctors that I knew from Japan, though they were from Pueblo, not Japanese, they were non-Japanese, but they were starting this practice, and they wanted me to come to help them kind of reimagine, rethink the way that we deliver healthcare. And of course, that was when the Affordable Care Act had just started. So I was fascinated, because we do have a lot of abandonment when you get into healthcare. There's a lot of things that have happened over time. And so we were looking at new and interesting ways to deliver on venous disease, which if you have any knowledge of what varicose veins are or what venous disease is. And in fact, there are a lot of situations where some of the symptoms are oftentimes overlooked as being venous disease, and there's very solid, proven methodology to cure a lot of those. So it was exciting opening up 8 clinics in 18 months. I thought I would be finished and on my way to another project, but like many, either your car breaks down on I-25 or there's something about Southern Colorado that just grabs you, and that it has done for me. So what we're gonna do is actually look at steel and meat, but really I want to take it further and look at just creativity and innovation, not only then, but also looking forward, because we have so many amazing assets. I mean, I just go down and I see the St. Cloud. I mean, there is a story of a beautiful structure that at one point, like many, could quite easily have been leveled or torn down, but now through some really hard and painful work sometimes, it's given it a new life, and I'm really excited. I was here earlier in the week and last week doing some presentations and was able to take a peek, and it's extraordinary because those types of structures tell us so much about the community. And for me, it's always the story behind the story. And we're going to get into some principles with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, ways in which you can get involved in your local community, and how do you learn about these stories behind the stories. So let's just begin here. Why am I here? So if we actually look at kind of the trajectory, one of the main reasons why we are here in this part of Colorado is because of water. We've really been blessed. I'm now, this is my second year on the board of directors for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. And just this last week, we did an amazing virtual seminar on water in this part of the country. And we had over 200 people on the call from every city and county in the state, because Pueblo and this part of the country, well, actually it's the whole state. We don't have a water problem, we have a water management problem. And because we're the headwaters state, there are actually 168 ways in which the water goes to all of our surrounding states. And because it's become so critical, because it is an existential problem, we're seeing what's happening with the Colorado River and going down to Arizona, and we're looking at what's happening in California and Nevada. And of course, Colorado's had its own lawsuits with Kansas, with Nebraska, with neighboring states. But we're very, very fortunate to be here. And in fact, when we look back historically, there are many families in this part of the country that can trace their roots back to the late 1500s, early 1600s. And many of those families, of course, water was where you would go for settling. It was where you would build communities. It would be where you would go to build industry. And of course, when you start talking about water, water can go in a lot of different ways. And if you're familiar with the Great Flood of 1921, which pretty much wiped out a great portion of southern Colorado, this is actually the Knuckles Packing Company the day of the flood, right after the flood. Actually, it was the day after. And this is located in the Grove. It's literally where the Arkansas River and the Fountain Creek actually meet. So it's truly the confluence, and that, of course, creates other issues with that. So not only did we have issues with that, but there were passengers, and I'm just going to show you this because it shows the magnitude. This is a Denver Rio Grande. There were 2 trains that were actually at Union Depot, which is right next to the meatpacking plant, 200 passengers. All of a sudden the cars started to rise. And I was in the Ghost Walk several years ago, and I played one of the survivors of the Denver Rio Grande train flood accident. About 90% of those passengers, about 200 of them, were actually rescued and taken to the upper floors of the meatpacking plant. But if you've ever seen, flood disasters, this is actually an amazing photo. If you look up in the upper corner, that's a car. You can see in the second floor, I don't know if it's a Model T, but it's one of those earlier Model A Model Ts. But this was a colorized photo just to show you what kind of destruction can happen. So then you ask yourself, why am I still here if this is a problem? And so what we're going to kind of look at are these two major industries. And, you know, Canyon City, this whole area of Fremont County going towards Pueblo and then further south, all of them played a huge role in the growth and development of these industries. In fact, when I do tours, last year I did, was it last year or the year before, Mary, when we did the tours? I can't remember the exact time, but we did it, and I loved it because sometimes you forget where you are. And there was an elderly woman, she must have been in her late 80s, early 90s. She remembered bringing rabbits to the meatpacking plant. Every time I do a tour, it's always kind of 1 degree of separation because there's either an aunt or an uncle, a cousin, a grandma, a grandpa, someone that worked in one of these major industries. So when people finally get to come and they go behind the brick walls, it's kind of magical because if you've been driving by it for generations and it's just a thing, once you get behind those walls, all of a sudden, especially with kids, I love bringing kids in these facilities because their minds just start spinning and they get just amazing ideas. But we're also going to look at the empire builders just briefly because you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. Mostly it's messy, like the Guggenheims and the Rockefellers who started their fortunes in this part of the country. We're going to talk about them just a little bit. But then Pueblo and this whole region, we're really in a unique position because we have so many older buildings, underutilized, oftentimes abandoned, forgotten, boarded up. And there are issues with that, but if there can be a really thoughtful and mindful way of actually talking about how they can be reintroduced into the community, we're finding great success stories, and that's something that's really fun to look at. And for me, the last 12 years, I kind of have a tagline: everything that I do is the future of the past. For some reason, there's something really beautiful about looking back and understanding as best as you can what happened, and then thinking about where you are now and then moving forward. There's something very, very positive and very powerful when you start having serious conversations about what you want to do moving forward, if it can be rooted in an authentic and genuine voice, based in the local stories, in the local community, you can do almost anything. It's not always easy, but it's a lot easier if it's rooted in an authentic voice. And that's something that we always try to do. So Colorado Fuel and Iron, CF&I, really was kind of, globally, an extraordinary story. And this first photograph is just really, this was in 1903. So, and up here in the front, this is where the administration building is. You can see the cupola there. If you go to the Steelworks Center today, this is where, and if you haven't been, there's the dispensary, which is where the museum is. And then through a very generous grant from CDOT and also from a lot of other organizations, they built the transportation park. And I was on the board of directors at the time. And the one thing that I was kind of amazed is you have this amazing, powerful industry that really changed the way that we think about the West, because it really did build the West. But if you go downtown and in other parts, you'd never know that it was a steel town. So one of the goals was, what can we do if we go on to the other side of I-25, if we pull some of the artifacts out, could we create a park? And so there are 14 objects that are in that park. And now you get a better sense of what was going on. But it's the Rockefeller family. They were the longest single shareholder from the early 1900s until about the 1940s. And the reason that I put these two photos together is this is what really changed the trajectory of what we would consider empire builders. So John D. Rockefeller Jr., and then you've got the whole kind of, a lot of white privilege. It was a lot of New York, Philadelphia. There were a lot of really powerful people that came from outside who saw the opportunity in steel. But down below, just as powerful, are the families that were at Ludlow. Because if you know anything about the Ludlow massacre and that story, which is really truly tragic in terms of what developed and what occurred, That was the turning point with the Rockefeller family. Up until the Ludlow massacre, the Rockefellers truly were focused almost exclusively on empire building. As a result of the Ludlow massacre, it switched to philanthropy. And you can read the transcripts of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who had to testify before Congress, and you can listen to these stories. The Congress, we thought you were out there building these, railroads, and you were building communities. Why are children, why are families being murdered out in these camps? And so you can listen to these stories about how they kind of gently, remove themselves from the immediacy of that. But as a result of that massacre, things that we take for granted now in terms of work hours, in terms of labor law, a lot of that was structured. And in fact, the Rockefellers brought in a gentleman who later went on to become the Prime Minister of Canada, who really created all of the legislation, all of the new labor kind of guidelines and regulations. And that's still a work in progress, even to this day, when we start talking about labor. But it is a really important part of the story. Now, within the steel mill, and I wasn't aware of this until I literally was able to go across I-25 and go on to the actual old plant. And of course, the sad thing is, it's like going to North Korea. You have to have a passport, you have to have your driver's license, you have to have all of this identification, and they don't let people come to visit, except on very rare occasions. Well, I had heard the story about the pattern shop. And at first I didn't really appreciate it, but when I went over, the first time I went was for a rescue mission. Because underneath the steel mill, I would say it's at least a football field in length underground, underneath the steel mill. And there are these racks that go up probably about 2 stories high. And what you'll find are all of these wooden patterns. And the pattern shop, these were 200 of the finest carpenters probably in the world. I mean, you could probably, they would be equal with all the great artisans who worked in wood. But this particular steel mill, they were so progressive. It wasn't like if you had a part breakdown, you'd get on the phone, call Amazon, and Amazon would deliver the part. They actually had to make the parts. So these wooden patterns were actually used in the sand relief process, and they would pour then the liquid steel into the sand, and they would create these parts by hand. So these parts, some of them are taller than I am, some of them are very small, but all of these have a unique, there's a real, what's its form and function is what I like to use, but clearly they had to build these themselves. So these carpenters did this. Well, when I went down into this subterranean level, which is really sad because water's leaking in there, wood doesn't last if you've got water and all that. So we rescued 900 of these in our first attempt. One day, 900, and some of them, one piece would fill up the back of a pickup truck. So we did this all day long, but I was able to curate an exhibition because I like to use contemporary art as a way to get people sometimes to understand what some of these objects are, because it's hard to explain what some of these actual pieces were, and you can see them, but there's a long tradition, and I found this all throughout Fremont County, Pueblo County, going down in Huerfano and other areas. It's a very DIY, do-it-yourself, kind of hands-on, we can do this, can-do attitude. And a lot of people have their own shops. They have their own, and in fact, these particular carpenters, they were very proud. They had shops at home, and they worked in this beautiful shop within the steel mill. So it really says a lot about just the ingenuity, the creativity, the innovation. A lot of this needed to happen, with really skilled and mindful people about not only what they were doing, but how do you problem solve. Sadly, I think we've lost a lot of that. We just get on the internet and we look for the part, you plug it in, and hopefully that will make it work. They actually had to go through the engineering process. They had to go through all of those things as part of that growth and development. I have been very fortunate. I've lived all over the world, and one of the most amazing things that I found when I got to this part of the country, especially southern Colorado, you look at kind of the wet mountains, the Front Range, and you look at these really unique communities, and then what drove these communities to grow and development. And so CF&I is really unique because it literally had an international call for workers. And there's a lot of really interesting stories, especially with Italians, how some Italians who perhaps were not so, shall we say, favorable to Italy, but more than welcome to send them to another country, similar to what the United Kingdom did with Australia, where it was kind of a penal colony, shall we say. Let's send the bad ones over there. Well, actually, there were stories about certain people that were let go from other countries to come. But what was amazing is, at one point within the steel mill, 40 languages were being spoken within the mill. And so that's just one part of it, but there were 26 daily foreign language newspapers in this part of the country. That doesn't even happen today. So again, we're talking about a time before television. We're talking about a time where print news was really critical, was really important. And so for me, coming from an immigration background where I've worked for other foreign governments, that was really important for me, but then also that brings in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the messy again. So one thing that really just blew my mind was this report. It was only produced one time, and if you look at the date, it was 1923 to 1924. So if you know your history and you remember the Exclusionary Act, it was a time when the US government was trying to create legislation to stop the influx of immigrants coming from other parts of the world. This particular report breaks down every single section of the steel mill and all the mines in this region, and then breaks it down by ethnicity. There were 10,000, it's just shy of 11,000, I think 10,823 workers. And it breaks it down into Group 1, American, just over 3,000. Group 2, Mexican, 1,300. Group 3, Austrian, Hungarian, Bohemian, German. You have about 1,200. Group 4, Bulgarian, Greek, Serbian, Montenegrin. You've got 260 plus. Group 5, English, Irish, Scotch, Welsh, all the way down. French, Spanish, Swiss, Italian, Belgian, Portuguese. You have Negro, of course, terms at that time, politically correct, incorrect, but over 400 workers. Then you have Finnish, Swedish. We've got Russian, Polish, Slavish, Croatian, Lithuanian. Then we have from Asia, Japanese, Chinese, Turkish, Assyrian. But it's really fascinating, and when you start to look at the numbers, you start to see a hierarchy within the mill. So certain classes were able to work at higher paying in certain parts of the mill. Of course, mining was the toughest, and they were the lowest paying, and in fact, there were quite a few incidents where the mules were more important than the workers were, and that became really problematic. If you haven't had a chance, there's a wonderful documentary that we helped produce, Jim Havey, who's considered the Ken Burns of Colorado. It's called Forging the West. It's the only film of its kind that really looks at this whole picture of what the steel mill really represented, how it grew and developed, how the first and second generations worked really, really hard in horrible conditions, but it was that third generation that finally got to reap the benefits of all of this hard work. Many who then would later go on to become well-educated. They were doctors, lawyers, school teachers, and what have you. But this report is really fascinating because it was only done one time, and it was done right when the Exclusionary Act hit the United States. So if you can imagine, if you're excluding people from around the world, that's pretty much excluding just about everyone, unless you were white workers from other countries. They had this whole hierarchy based on color of skin and what have you. But I found this report fascinating. I unearthed it, and now it's being used all over. Picture of Greg Poltanovich. If you go to the Steelworks Center. This is a sculpture that is now outside. It greets you when you go to the Steelworks Park. But this is of one of the CF&I workers. And I was on the committee, Greg Poltanovich, who's a very famous artist who has done presidents, he's done all kinds of famous individuals. We commissioned him to do this with a grant from the Levert Hogue Foundation. And it took us 5 times to get it right, because first we had a picture and then we had a maquette made, just a model. So when we got the model back, we decided we're going to call actual living, working, people from the steel mill. And when we brought them to look at this maquette, they said, our glasses didn't look like that. Our belt didn't look like that. So after 5 times, we finally arrived at this statue. And it's really, really beautiful. So just about a mile and a half down the road is the Knuckles Packing Company. And what's amazing is when you look at the neighborhoods, they're about a mile and a half, but you have Slovenian, Hungarian, Yugoslavian, you've got Italian, you've got Mexican, all the neighbors, Greek, very kind of micro-segregated all throughout. But the story actually goes back well before. This was in 1891, but before this, the Knuckles family, they were very close with the Guggenheims. And the Guggenheims were up in Leadville, silver mining. Everyone was in Leadville. Leadville was where a lot of money was being made. So he took his slaughter and his meatpacking business up into the Leadville area because they needed a lot of support, because that area was growing. But Emmett Knuckles, the founder, he remembered how lovely the weather is in this part of the state of Colorado, and it's a lower elevation. So none of this 10, 11, 12,000 feet, he wanted to come down. So actually, Emmett Knuckles, who's the founder, he actually purchased that plant. Now, sadly, he never got to see the plant that we see today built. He actually fell 3 stories from the old plant. He didn't die from the fall, but he shattered his hip. And the chieftain, the Pueblo chieftain, the local newspaper, had a 2-week vigil. And every day they would publish his condition at the top of the paper. And you're probably wondering, why this man? Why did this man have a vigil? Well, the year before he ran for mayor, and he was a registered Republican, talked like a Democrat. One day he's got so fed up with politics, he called a parade and he announced that he was independent. This was in 1908. So local people just thought, this man is awesome. He came down from the mountains. He's a really smart businessman. He hates politics. We want to know how he's doing. Sadly, on the 14th day, it was one of the largest headlines in the chieftain history, and it just says, death called. So what happened next was his son, George Harvey Knuckles, who's very significant in Colorado history, he was actually the one who was given the responsibility to actually locate Hans Peter Henschen, the Norwegian. But this particular plant, in 1915, they kind of started doing the design work. And in 1916, they did the groundbreaking. It took 1 year to build, $300,000 budget. And day one, they were doing 300 sheep, 600 cattle, and 2,000 hogs. It truly was a massive, and it was the world's largest facility, safest, most modern, and in fact, in October, so they opened in March of 1917, in October of 1916, everyone was watching this massive fortress being built. And when you look at it today from I-25 or anywhere, it's a big, there's 2 million bricks just in the facade alone. So when this was actually built, they decided we need to do a VIP tour. So 75 people, 25 of which came from other parts of the country and overseas. They literally brought in people from all over the world on this tour, and the others were all local. Well, the plant was so large, 3 people got lost. A city council member, one of the ministers, and one who ran a foundation. They had to call search and rescue. So the chief did love this. You know, they've been watching this building go up over months, and all of a sudden they do a VIP tour in October. The next day, building is so big, 3 people got lost. So it was actually rather a good story for the building. But when you think about it, it's located next to water, it's located next to rail. All of these things really enabled it to become just an extraordinary part of commerce in this part of the country. Now, George Harvey was also, the flood happened in 1921. And for those of you that don't know all the horse trading that went on, Pueblo and southern Colorado really had a lot of influence in the legislature in Denver at that time, because this is where a lot of the ranching was. It was where a lot of the business was in this particular area. And after the flood, Pueblo wanted to be able to do what only the federal government is able to do in terms of eminent domain. You just can't move a railway. You just can't move a house or a road. That is a really special ability for government, and usually the national government is in charge of that. But Pueblo wanted to have the ability to decide for itself what it would do with this levee that they needed to build. So in exchange for, Denver legislators had been pushing for the Moffett Tunnel for years. They wanted to shorten the route by 78 miles and go through the Rocky Mountains. So that is literally what the horse exchange was. They gave Pueblo the right to create the Conservancy District, and in exchange, the Moffett Tunnel was built. That literally kind of led to the demise of passenger traffic. Freight, we still have 1 million rail cars that go through Pueblo a year. But George Harvey and Charles Lee were the 2 people that led the legislative kind of commission to make this happen. And they were the first individuals on the board of directors for the Conservancy. But Hans Peter Henschen, he was a Norwegian. He emigrated in 1901. He set up a shop in his early 20s in Chicago. And so he really was very, very smart. For those that have read Upton Sinclair and The Jungle, meatpacking facilities were notorious for being really just unsanitary. And in 1906, the US government actually passed the Food Safety Act. So you couldn't build meatpacking plants in the old way. You really had to build them in a really smart way. So what's really amazing is he partnered with the USDA, and he actually, what we call the Slaughterhouse Bible. He actually published this 300-page book, and he partnered with the USDA. So if you built a meatpacking plant, and this was the first plant in Pueblo of 300 that he built around the world, literally in almost every country around the world that had the need for meatpacking. Pueblo was where the first plant was built. But he published this book called Packing House and Cold Storage Construction, a general reference work. It literally goes through all these chapters. If you followed all of those guidelines, you could have a US government inspector on your property stamping your meat US government inspected products. It was a game changer for this part of Colorado. We were looked at with all the ranches in Fremont, Pueblo County, all of these areas. This was the place where things like this happened. And so people came from around the world to actually see what was happening. This is a photograph from 1926 when the ice house was built. And you can see in that billboard where it says Mission Hams and Bacon, it says US government inspected products. I wish that billboard was still up there. It's pretty cool. But Marion Knuckles and the whole management team, they loved to take photographs every year of all the workers out in front. They were very proud of this facility. In fact, for 3 generations, for 60 years, this was the safest meatpacking plant to work in the entire world. And they were very, very proud of that. And what's really interesting about the design is the kill floors are on the 4th floor. They did studies in the late 1800s that determined that animals could march all the way up to the 4th floor without injuring themselves. And because there's about 2,000, 3,000, up to 4,000 animals going through there a day, there's a lot more than meat that needs to be handled. So this particular design shows all the vertical integration. So with the kill floor on the 4th floor, all you had to do was use a slide, drop it through a pipe. I mean, you have everything, the hide slide, you had the blood boilers, the rendering tanks, all of that was done. So gravity was their main form of technological innovation. And you see this term, the rational factory. This is really unique because this was the same time that Henry Ford was developing his automobile assembly line. And the rational factory is about people, processes, and successful outcomes. And like an assembly line for cars, this was the same thing for meatpacking. It was a way for them to design. Now, what's unique about this plant in Pueblo and many of the others, there are no load-bearing walls. It's 250,000 square feet with no load-bearing walls. All the weight is being supported by these elegant columns, which you'll find all throughout the building. And it's why, in fact, during the flood, the only damage, you probably saw that one wall that came off the administration building. That came off because a freight car was rushing down the river, hit the North Water Tower, ricocheted off, and just happened to hit the front of that building, which was already being eaten away by the expansion of the river and the heavy currents. So this rational factory, this idea of cluster designs, was a really smart and efficient way, especially if technology was changing. Because as soon as you have to remove a load-bearing wall, we know what that entails. It's a lot of money. And because this was 250,000 square feet, it gave them a lot of efficiencies because everything was cluster-based. But what I find so fascinating, and this is where the story, we actually have 3 screenwriters, 2 from Netflix, another, who really want to tell this story that happened here in southern Colorado. And Marion Knuckles, actually, and I'll tell you in a minute, in this church in 1921 did something extraordinary, which I didn't know about until I started digging in, and someone said, the Steeple Center is actually the Presbyterian Church. That's where this all happened. So Marion Knuckles is the granddaughter of the founder, Emmett Knuckles. And in 1928, her father, G.H., who we saw, George Harvey, he passed away. Well, the board of directors immediately, without hesitation, appointed Marion, the younger sister, president, and her older sister, Della, vice president and treasurer. That was the first time in the United States for women to be appointed in C-level, executive-level jobs in a major food industry. Marion Knuckles was one of the world's finest classical pianists, but at the same time, she was the vice president of the Southern Colorado Investment Corporation. So she had right brain going, left brain going, and what I love is in her very first year, she created an employee salary savings plan, employee life insurance plan, she created the credit union, and also she made worker safety priority number 1. They were very proud of that. We don't even do this today when you talk about industry and business. But Marion was very, very shrewd. This photo is actually taken out in front of the family residence, which is on the National Register of Historic Places in Pueblo at 38 Carlisle. And in fact, if you know where, it's actually where 4th Street and Abriendo meet, not too far from Pueblo Community College, there's a little pocket of really great old homes. This was one of them. But in 1921, this is from the Canyon City Daily Record, and popular Pueblo society girl to appear in concert here. This was the promotional information for the concert that was held in this church in 1921. And Miss Mary Knuckles will appear in 2 piano numbers with the Pueblo artists at the Canyon City Music Club opening concert, Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, Presbyterian Church. The concert is free to all music lovers of Canyon City who believe that a community music club is a good thing and who are willing to lend their assistance by taking a membership, either active or associate. So this was the first. She came here. She was huge in music, literally internationally known. But most in the state, she really kind of was very regional and wanted to make sure that local communities had an opportunity to really excel in music. As a result of this concert, 150 people joined, and it became this amazing. So actually, this is the next part. Puebloans to aid in first program of Canyon City's new music club. They had to hold it at the Armory. So, and I learned a lot about the Armory. That's a whole other story that I need to start studying because of the armories that were built all throughout the state by a very famous architect up in Denver. So, and I've learned that the Armory has a history of its own right in terms of the organizations, the different types of groups, and what the Armory did in addition to the National, I guess the National Guard and others used that facility, but it was really a center for community engagement. But I just found this fascinating that they were really taking music and using music as a vehicle to really reach out to a lot of the communities. And the concert that they had here in the church that one evening led to, and they were looking for either active or associate memberships. They actually had 150 people, which then they went to the Armory, and I need to study more, but I just found that absolutely fascinating. Just goes to show you the depth of these individuals. Now, her older sister, Della, and of course, you just look at that picture right away and you can kind of imagine what type of a woman she was. But Della was older. She was born in 1899. She did not want to be president. She was studying with Martha Graham in Los Angeles as a Denishan dancer. And she was a Broadway star. So she just wanted to go do a Broadway play, come back and help with the family, meet business, and then go back and forth. But Della was truly, like Marion, an extraordinary woman who, over her entire life, sadly, Marion died at a very young age. During World War II, the US government shut down the meatpacking plant because of tin rationing, meat controls, price controls. You practically had to give up 70% of your output in order to keep operating, and not all plants could do that. But Della, because of her very shrewd social skills, had a massive network of people. And actually, I did throw into this something that we just found on the beaches of Southern California. That's Martha Graham in the center, and this is Della right here. Dancing. So this was an extra, I mean, the Denishan dancers, that's a whole amazing story in its own right. But the skills and the talents that they developed were very popular for a lot of the Broadway shows. And Della was very much part of the Folies Bergère, all of those. It's almost like a talent show with hundreds of people, musicians and numbers. And she did that for many, many years. We actually now have, from the Library of Congress, recordings of some of the numbers that she did. And also, I'm working with the Schubert Theater and the Schubert Foundation in New York. They have some of the costumes that she wore. So we're hopefully going to be able to bring them back. But one thing that's really interesting is I work with the Knuckles children, their grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and same with the Henshin family. And every now and then we will exchange gifts, shall we say. And if you're not part of history, you know, it's hard to understand the depth or the magnitude that your family maybe had in a local community unless you were either alive at that time or you're a researcher and you study and you've been told the stories. So on one of my, this was just before the pandemic, I met with the family and they provided me these private letters between Della and J.C. Hormel of the Hormel Meat Company. So can you imagine this? This was in 1943. So we're in the middle of the war, and their plant is shut down, and these letters are amazing. They're actually these industry leaders talking about how can we keep your business open? How can we reopen your business? So, I mean, dear Della, you know, yours very true. I mean, there's just a treasure trove of communications. Della was very, very shrewd when it came, because during the war, Marion went out to San Jose, California. And when she left, Della then became the president. So Della took it upon herself. One, she was working with industry magnates, kingpins in the industry to try to figure out, do they need to keep the plant? Do they sell the plant? Well, because of her very, very shrewd relationships, she was able to sell the plant to American stores. And let me just, there we go. She was able to sell the plant to American stores out of Philadelphia. And they were the parent company for Acme Markets. And Acme Markets was the largest grocery store chain on the East Coast. And then from 1946 until about 1971, that company made huge investments, not only in the plant, but in the entire 5-county region, because it was all about the ranchers. It was all about all the other parts. They built these amazing relationships. So in 1971, the plant was then sold to Alpha Beta. And many of us know the plant as being Alpha Beta. Now, Alpha Beta was a California grocery store chain. And the board of directors in California were a little bit upset because all their cattle were grazing on these beautiful bluffs overlooking the ocean. And these board of directors members are thinking, that land is really valuable. We got to get those cows off of those bluffs. So they actually decided that they needed to find another location, and they actually already had a relationship with Pueblo. They purchased the plant outright, added new rail spurs, and they actually then would take whole, half, and quarter carcasses, refrigerated boxcars, 2 days out to La Habra, California, where then they would distribute the carcasses to all of their stores. Alpha Beta started in 1948 a program called Butcher's Pride. Every store had its own butcher, and butchers don't like anyone touching their meat. They want that whole carcass. And so this was a beautiful solution. The trains would arrive, whole carcasses were there, and they would send it out to their respective stores all throughout Arizona and California, and those butchers then would cut the meat specifically to their local customers in their community. That was a big deal. So what's interesting now is this rational factory, we're kind of trying to use this idea, this concept, people, processes, and successful outcomes. So here we have this 250,000 of square feet, and if you come on a tour, this is actually the last rampway system where the animals would march up 4 stories and then they would circle around. This is actually the chute, and that's where the animals would be rendered unconscious, and then they would go out to the kill floor, and the rest is hamburger, T-bones, sirloin steaks. It was everything in there. But this was done. This pattern here on the floor was designed to help the animals with traction. But I was telling you earlier about no load-bearing walls. This is what supports all of the weight, each floor. There are these massive columns. But if you come for a tour, more than happy to show you. But we've been using the rooftops now. This is a view out over Pikes Peak. This is the upper Riverwalk Terrace. And then on the first floor, we have these huge storyboards that talk about all the individuals. Because when I actually, just to back up a little bit, before I came to Pueblo, I actually worked on 2 other meatpacking plants, one in Shanghai and one in Berlin. This was not even on my radar. But when I got to Pueblo to work with these doctors, I saw this building, and I knew immediately who the architect was because he's such a signature architect. But I had no idea where this particular plant fitted into the greater story. It was unearthing it. So for me, I see people come and go, but it seems to be a shame if you came into this building for whatever service or whatever product is being offered, but you don't know the story behind the building. So for me, there's this whole corridor. It's like a museum alleyway where we actually tell these stories. But the one thing that really I've been fascinated with, I got involved in historic preservation when I lived in Japan. I grew up in Japan, and I was very fortunate to work on the 1200th anniversary of the city of Kyoto. Can you imagine? I mean, I coming from America, our country is like 200 some years old, and I'm thinking 1200 years, and they're still celebrating that. So for me, and you start talking about 1200 years historic preservation and conservation, I started to get more involved with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And when you get into preservation, there is kind of a tug of war that goes on with organizations that work in those areas. And you have to find the right balance. But I won't go into all of these in detail. I'll just read the tops. But if you go to the National Trust, go to their website, there's this whole notion of re-urbanism. What can you do with existing infrastructure? So shaping communities through adaptive reuse. The meatpacking plant in Pueblo is the largest adaptive reuse project in the state of Colorado and probably in the top 5 in the country. There are very few buildings that are even that size anymore. And going back so long and built so well, we're just very fortunate to have these resources. And you'll find that all throughout Colorado. I go out and I lecture and tour all throughout, and I'm amazed at some of the resources. Some are smaller, some not as large, but they can get pretty close. But these 10 are, cities are only successful when they work for everyone. Older places provide the distinctiveness and character that engender success. Older neighborhoods are economic engines. New ideas and the new economy thrive in older buildings. Preservation is adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is preservation. Preservation is about managing change. If that isn't powerful right there. Cities are for people, not vehicles. Interesting. My favorite is this one. The greenest building is the one that's already built. Now there could be some problems with that depending. We're really lucky. The meatpacking plant, when it was built, we tested. There's no asbestos. That was a gift from some really wonderful place. Also, the building from the basement with no load-bearing walls, from the basement all the way to the rooftop, is 6 inches of cork. And when you come on the tours, we'll show you. Cork was the #1 material used for insulation, for acoustics, all of that. So if you know southern Colorado weather, where it can fluctuate 40, 50, sometimes 60 degrees in one day, this building doesn't fluctuate more than 15 degrees because of this cork. So we tested the cork. The cork is only animal and plant-based. So we were so lucky. We're trying to repurpose. Sadly, some of the new codes don't like us having cork, and in some places we have to remove it, but it is the smartest, most sensible material to use for those areas. And then there are many ways to achieve density, and every community has stories and places that matter. And that's why I love working with Historical Society. Whenever I travel, if I find there's a lecture or a talk, I just find those stories behind the stories are real, and the people behind the stories is really what gets me excited. And I find that once those stories are told and there's a greater appreciation, I'll do walking tours all throughout Lamar, La Junta, Pueblo, Kenya. And people will say, well, why is this building here? What's the story behind it? This building could be in London, it could be in New York, it could be in Chicago. Why is it here in this part of the country? So I love those. So I encourage you, there's a lot more on their website. And if you're not a member already, it's not very expensive. They do amazing programming, and it's really, really powerful. But this next part is the future of the past. Again, it's kind of my tagline. But how do you navigate the frontier? And the frontier, if you just think about what the frontier is, that is a place unknown. That is a place that needs to be explored, discovered. So I wrote 3 pieces which I think are universal, and I call them the 3 C's. And it's about community, creativity, and courage. And I'm just going to read them. They're not very long, but Pueblo is and always has been a city at the crossroads where people and ideas converge in a powerful display of creative genius. Since its earliest days, the citizens of Pueblo have brought to the fabric of the community a long tradition of exploration, discovery, and self-expression. And I think that's universal no matter where you go, is tapping into those 3 things: exploration, discovery, and self-expression. Turning ideas into action. The Arkansas River in Pueblo has served as the international boundary with France, Spain, Mexico, and the Republic of Texas. When I learned that, I had no idea where I was. We're in the middle, landlocked, and we're the international boundary with France, Spain, Mexico, and the Republic of Texas. How does that happen? And when I work with kids now, that is just one of those things that their eyes just, first of all, many have never even left the county line. And here we're talking about international boundaries. But that says a lot, that whole borderlands kind of culture, the way of doing business, the way of arts, history, all of that. But the Arkansas River, making it a true frontier region in the Southwest where every day, the region has been at the epicenter of opportunity in Colorado since the early 1840s, when the early settlers built the El Pueblo Fort for trading and commerce. The steel industry, driven by Colorado Fuel and Iron, ushered in generations of workers from around the world who brought with them their own unique cultures and perspectives on humanity. And the next one, creativity, borrows from that, but exploration, discovery, and self-expression have been the key drivers in the development of Pueblo since its earliest beginnings. History, culture, and the arts have empowered individuals to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Humanity can get messy, but it's during these moments when one finds him or herself on the fringe or outside of one's comfort zone that light shines bright. A community that embraces and understands the power of light and creativity is more apt to be fluid and flexible in the process of problem solving. Change agents in the community welcome diversity and encourage participation and ownership from all stakeholders in the conversation. I find there's the good, the bad, the ugly, but for me, I like to concentrate on the messy, because that's where all the humanity is in any good story. It's in the messy. And sometimes that can be difficult, depending upon the story, but at the end of the day, I think it's an area that we need to look at more carefully. Courage, this area of the country, I hear stories about just people being just incredibly courageous. And I'm writing a book, having grown up in Japan, I'm writing a book that is called No is a Hard Yes. And I could do a whole lecture on what that means. But no is a hard yes, and you have to hold down the grass really hard when you create a new pathway for others to follow. Change is hard, and when you add sustainability to the equation, 1 + 1 does not always equal 3. It takes failure and a lot of courage to make a difference for our children of the future. Pueblo's unique landscape is fostering the extension of the frontiers of opportunity. Communities must have a conversation about the complex issues of shelter, energy, waste, water, and food when we talk about sustainability and the human race. This must start locally. Pueblo has the courage and the capacity to face the challenges before us today. I find this all throughout southern Colorado. And again, I think it gets back to that notion. If you think about all the different immigrants, people that came from all over the world, and if you look at World War I, 1914 to 1917, 1918 was the Spanish flu, 1921 was the flood, 1922 we had just destruction in Pueblo. Then you had the stock market, you had the Depression, then you had the Dust Bowl. I mean, many of these towns would just fold up and they'd disappear. But it really is all about the people. And if you came to the United States for opportunity, you are more than likely to kind of pick yourself up and try to make it work again and again. So I give this entire region of the state, more so than anywhere else. You come out of these mountains and you just go all the way south, southwest, and southeast, and there's this extraordinary kind of can-do, roll up your sleeves. I can do this. We can do this. Sometimes it gets problematic because everyone wants to call a cousin to see if they can fix something or do something for them, which is wonderful, but sometimes you need to call an expert. But this notion of 1 degree of separation can be really powerful when you're talking about community building. So I've kind of come up with some of these characteristics. What are some of the things you need for the community to be really kind of successful in whatever you set forth as being your goals, but creativity, innovation, sustainability, this notion of survival. I mean, we're kind of lucky now, although we do have some existential things we need to think about moving forward. But passion, pride. I have never lived any place else in the world that has so much pride. I mean, I look at Fremont County, Pueblo County, I go down to Huerfano, I go throughout all of the 13, 14 counties. There is so much pride. And a lot of it is really rooted in a lot of this survival, all of these things. You know, we've gone through it, we know what to expect, but strategic and patience. Patience can sometimes be really annoying, but boy, it's really helpful when you really need to create kind of a critical mass. So these are just some of the things that I like to just encourage all communities to think about. But learn about and support the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's just a great model to look at. Incorporate the 10 principles of reurbanism in your daily life. If you go through those and you read them in more detail and you look at some of the examples, there's going to be 2 or 3 of those that will just pop out right away, and you'll see it on a certain block on Main Street or in some area of your community. Identify architectural assets dotting the landscape and learn to tell the story. It's one thing to know. That's why I'm so excited about this Tiffany stained glass window. I can't get it out of my mind because it adds another layer to that story. And Tiffany is an amazing world-class story. And the fact that it was brought to this church in this town, and similarly where I am in Pueblo, that is exciting. And to build on that. Dig into the story by using like, for example, you have archives, you've got areas. That's what I love about being in Pueblo. There's so many places to go to get information. I love that. And then that will, and of course the people that work there are passionate. I mean, that's the best thing. And they oftentimes know people, like first, sources, people that were actually even there, or a relative or someone that could share in that story. Become a member of a local historical society, understand and share the importance of forward-thinking, innovative, and thoughtful adaptive reuse, and take ownership and become part of your community's story. It's hard work, but I found that and I've done this all over the world, and you deal with certain cultural issues, but when people come together and there's a common story and it involves community building, there's an energy there, there's a synergy there, but it's hard work. Things don't happen overnight. I'm not going to read this, and I'll make this presentation available to anyone if you'd like to, and I know that it's going to be filmed, but this is just, there are so many examples. I reached out to Jane Fraser. She was the Dean of Engineering at CSU Pueblo for about 25 years. She retired, and she's a maker. And I kind of think all of these towns in southern Colorado are like tinker towns. They're like maker towns. Everyone has something to contribute. She wrote something about what it was like for her growing up on the East Coast and then coming here to this part of the country and feeling very comfortable because she was looking at and working with similar people. So now, just to give you a little bit about what's happening visually, so if you want to come take a tour, I encourage you, but what we're doing is, it really is a vertical urban village, and we're taking advantage of the structure. So before, the Rational Factory was all about meat and meat processing, slaughter, meat processing. Now, the Rational Factory is about being better together. So instead of all the clusters being the kill floor, the cellars and all of that, now it's our food market, our artist zone, lifestyle and wellness, event space, media center, the Hans Peter Center for Creativity and Innovation. And what we're doing as a nonprofit is our board of directors are like village elders representing engineering, art, education, library, archives, manufacturing, wellness, lifestyle, food, business, politics, and historic preservation. We're just trying to take and utilize an original story, so community, collaboration and ideation, prototyping, fabrication, entrepreneurship, and incubator. This is one of the areas, because it was an industry, we have a steel fabrication shop. And we have, for example, Southern Colorado Innovation Link, which is a new innovative hub, co-working, accelerator, startup, and makerspace. There are already, I know Florence has some, Canyon City, there's a lot of new programs that have developed, really looking at how do individuals, how do small businesses actually take advantage of some of the new technology. one of the fun things that I'm really enjoying is on the rooftop of Water Tower Place, we have these old light wells. They're like little, we call them Frank Lloyd Wright condominiums. They have 4 little windows around them. Well, when they first built this plant in 1917, my theory is because there were windows, there were light wells, everything. I don't think Hans-Peter Henschen realized how intense the sun is at about 5,000 feet. So the last thing you want in a meatpacking plant is light. So they bricked in all the windows and they closed these light wells. Well, we're actually putting 50,000 bees into each one of these. It's a program called Bee Cool, B-E-E Cool. We've partnered with PCC with their STEM program. So we're actually going to use the rooftop and create these sustainable programs. We have other structures on the property. In 1946, when American Stores came in, they built what's known as the Livestock Hotel. It's only 1/10 of its original size, but it could accommodate up to 4,000 animals. It was 5-star accommodations before the next day because no animals stayed for more than 24 hours. And they went on to become steaks and hamburger and all that good stuff. But we're doing some fun things with artists. And while we don't have the money, say for example, or we need to wait, all of the windows, for example, are all broken out. So we're actually going to start doing these filters, which will be just temporary, but it'll be an artistic way for local artists to be able to make something that looks kind of, no one likes broken windows or just the frame. So these are just some of the things. It's called the Windows Project. The other thing that's really big is food. This was originally was a processing center. So the food market, we're looking at opening up that. The other thing that's really interesting is the building was abandoned for about 30 years. And a building of this size, sitting empty, is really attractive to graffiti artists, taggers. So we have within the building some of the world's finest graffiti art, Russian artists, European artists, Latin American artists, people from Asia and all over the United States. Those, what they call crews, we have several crews in Pueblo. This is actually the monster that lives in one of the ovens, because on every floor of the meatpacking plant, we have smoking alleys. Because in 1917, not everyone had refrigerators. So they smoked the meats, they aged the meats, but you needed ovens. So in the oven, this is directly related to, this is the artist Matt Reffick. And this was one of his first monsters that he built. Well, he published a book called Meet Your Monsters. It's a self-assessment book where you can color in and then it has questions. Reffick is one of about 30 people with unrestricted access to the Supermax prison here. And he goes in and he teaches art to these prisoners. He created this book because we all have our own monsters. So this book is a way for you to go in and do a self-assessment. It's sold on Amazon. It's called Meet Your Monsters. But our very first book that we're publishing is called Graffiti Art at Water Tower Place, because we have 80 works that we're preserving from all over the world. So if you take over a space, and some of these are massive, then you will be the custodian for this artwork, and it'll be part of the book. Do any of you remember Cruz Bags department store in Pueblo? Well, I bought the rights to Cruz Bags. Sadly, the store has been long gone. The building has been gone, though we may be rebuilding the building. But what we're doing is we're working with local artists, local artisans in the community, so woodworkers, glass workers, painters, sculptors, but we're creating a Cruz Bags boutique, and that will actually feature. Now, this is interesting. So you remember the pattern shop that I showed you earlier? This is a reinterpretation of one of the patterns. So I asked Joe Cronwitter, who's an amazing carpenter in Pueblo, I asked him to choose. I actually chose the patterns, and I said, what would you do with these? So he's creating a mirror. This is a martini, a cocktail table, 2 levels, and he redesigned it. But what we're trying to do is use these patterns because there are so many of them, in some cases we may be able to use the real pattern, but these were imitations. He took the original pattern and recreated them. But again, it's just using local talent that we have in our area. I design shoes in Italy. I have about 15 designs. It's a program that we started many years ago to try to save all of the cobblers all throughout Italy, because all of your fine leather shoes, about 95% of them are still manufactured in Italy. Sadly, shoes have taken a turn for the worse in China, Pakistan, where we have these factories, many of them 12-year-olds who have never seen their parents are making these shoes. So what I'm doing is I'm working all of these shoes. That one there is called Prohibition. This one is called, this is the Entrepreneur. That's a photograph inside the meatpacking plant. That's one of the murals. So what I'm doing is I'm working with local artists and actually trying to save these shoes, but they're very affordable. You can order them online. They ship them for free from Italy. And then I'm working with kids in schools. So if a school wants to design their own shoe as part of a fundraiser, we're doing that too. But all of my shoes are rooted in Southern Colorado stories. So I'm trying to use that as another way. I grew up on a movie set in Southern California, literally. MASH, Little House on the Prairie, Oregon Trail. I grew up in kind of a surreal, Gilligan was one neighbor, Alice Cooper was another neighbor. Very surreal. But I grew up, and in 2018, Harley Davidson called me. And they wanted to come to Pueblo, and every year they choose one city, usually one, sometimes two, and they bring their new models under top secret. I mean, it's a stealth operation. And they first came to Pueblo, and they were only going to shoot about maybe 20% of the shoot in Pueblo. Once they got to Pueblo, they realized there were all of these other places. And if you know the story of Harley and Wisconsin, Milwaukee, you understand Wisconsin, this kind of blue collar, steel town, manufacturing. They loved it. So what happened was they ended up shooting 80% of all of the models. And they literally have like these 2-story black screens with roofs, and they move them around with the bikes because people have drones to take pictures of the new models. It's totally top secret. Well, we shot this. It went viral. We went to, 33 countries. It was 26 million views all over the world. We printed 500,000 of the Harley calendars that they print each year. And then it was Governor Hickenlooper who called me, and he says, Gregory, what are you guys doing in Southern Colorado? You guys are marketing the state more than anywhere else, and you don't even have a film commission. So they gave us the seed money to start a film commission. And this is just a picture of the Heritage Classic in front of City Hall. That's the Vail Hotel and the Senate Bar. So again, we have all of these assets all throughout our region. Again, just another way to share that. This is just a picture of the Grove. I actually live in this little tiny house next to this amazing art gallery, but the Grove is a very unique area of Pueblo, historically, culturally, and it was where the families first came to settle because there were springs there. We have 4 springs. We have Clark Spring water. There's other springs, plus we have the confluence of the Arkansas and Fountain Creek. So it's where the first settlers would come because they had water, grasses, and all of these huge trees for shade, hence the name The Grove. So just to give you a little bit of a view. So another project is we're starting to work with all the neighborhoods. And I mentioned earlier, Beaujohntown is getting a huge, really exciting new project. This is Eilers Heights, right at Northern, right just north of the steel mill. But there's an old restaurant, you might remember, and bar called the Grand Prix. Well, that has been purchased by Jane Fraser, who I mentioned earlier, the retired CSU engineering chair. Jane Fraser, Emily Gradisar, who used to run TikTok, and also Sam DeRosier. They're creating a huge maker space, a sober bar. We have a lot of bars in Pueblo, And, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of them. So they have a sober bar, and they're creating a whole new community center in Eilers Heights. And so we're actually looking, the Blocks is another neighborhood. These are just some of the visuals. The Grove, if you remember, and of course it's Let's Meet, M-E-A-T, at Water Tower Place. Do you remember that floor pattern up on the fourth floor? So we're trying to use some of these designs. Johnny's Boiler Shop was the very first tenant in the building. It's been around since 1946. It wasn't going anywhere, not for any good, bad, or ugly reason, but Ryan McWilliams, who purchased the building, purchased Johnny's and moved it in. Because when we purchased the building, there were no windows, no doors, no gas, water, it was like a big ship and dry dock. So having your own in-house steel fabrication shop has been a huge deal. These are all maker spaces, Pueblo Makes, that are moving in. Again, and I mentioned Southern Colorado Innovation Link. This, we got a $1.6 million grant from the federal government, from the Economic Development Administration. And that's just being able to connect all of our different players in our ecosystem. This was a video. This is an actual drone shot. So this gives you a really good idea of where it's located, because you can see the Riverwalk on the other side of the tracks, but we're surrounded by 3 different rails. And then these are just, we've taken each floor. The first floor, manufacturing, innovation hub, food market, arts and retail, office space. And a lot of people have complained over the years that CSU Pueblo, which sits up on the hill, is really disconnected from the community. Well, CSU Pueblo has opened up their first downtown office in Water Tower Place. And this next shot was the opening. So this gives you an idea of what we're doing inside the meatpacking plant. This is where all of the carcasses used to hang. If you were a restaurateur or if you were a butcher and you ordered meat wholesale, this was the final room, but this is what's happening now. And again, all of the weight is being held by columns. I brought in an entire kimono exhibition, and we hung kimonos all throughout the meatpacking plant and Obi's. And in fact, on April 8th, if you're in Pueblo, we're going to do the same thing. Yumiko Kato, who is from Canyon City, very famous textile artisan. Sadly, she's not doing well, so we're going to have one more huge fundraiser for her, April 8th, and we're going to be selling all of her kimonos and Obis in the old Crest department store at 3rd and Main in downtown in the huge atrium. So I'll give you some more information about that. But it just goes to show you what we can do with the spaces. This was a huge, like Shark Tank, this was a pitch event. And we have Walter Robb there, who is the founder of Whole Foods, Senator Bennett. They all came. This is part of the Pueblo Food Project. And then just to go quickly, 2nd floor, micro apartments, ice house, office space. And this is the administration building where we started doing public events. So we have been able to create over 100,000 square feet of outdoor terraces just by using the rooftops. And because of the engineering, our load capacity is 2,500 pounds per square inch. We don't even build that today. So that gives us an opportunity to use what we have. And when I first got to Pueblo, I'm thinking, God, the weather's really nice here all year round. Why don't people eat outdoors? Well, now we have all these outdoor terraces, so that's going to be kind of nice. And this is a photograph, actually, of the kill floor itself, the 4th floor. A lot of the things, this was a group of female Russian filmmakers that came to Colorado, and it was through Springs, through their international council, but they found out that we were really being very aggressive in terms of promoting film and using a lot of our local assets. So they came for a full-day seminar down from Colorado Springs. They were wonderful, but it really just gives you an idea of what you can do with these huge spaces. The 4th floor is 30,000 square feet of special event space, and that's what we're kind of working on up there. but let me just show, these are just some pictures. Hans-Peter Henschen, this is why I knew about Hans-Peter Henschen. When you look at the design, this is a meatpacking plant. Why? I mean, when you go to a steel mill, you kind of know what you're getting into when you walk onto the grounds of a steel mill. My theory is Hans-Peter Henschen, he knew what the work was like. He didn't want the workers to think they were going to a meatpacking plant. They were just going to a lovely office building for the day. But this is what we're doing with the rooftops. So we have amazing views. That's Pikes Peak in the background. This is what's known as the Upper Riverwalk Terrace. Those are the chimneys that attach to the smokers, but we just take advantage of these rooftops and with our weather. Another thing is Nonprofit Alley, yoga on the terrace. So we have yoga, Tai Chi, we have Zumba, we have napping, we have plein air painting, we've got brunch on the terrace. It's kind of a whole brand thing that we're developing. We have probably 1 or 2 film production companies that come by a week. They love this building. This is the kill floor and just a lot of different teams. We also had 1 wedding for 300 people on the kill floor, very early in our development. It was a ranching family and an electrician who worked on our elevators and said, we want to get married in here. We said, well, if you're going to get married in here, it's not going to be all fancy. It's going to be pretty raw. And so they came, they did the ceremony on the Upper Riverwalk Terrace, and then they did, again, these are some of the murals on the inside. That's the couple, and they have 2 kids now already. So it must have been a very auspicious honeymoon after this. The other thing that we're doing, I do illumination projects around the world, and now with LED lighting, and this is something Canyon City, I'm hoping we can do this all throughout the region. But what we do is we tell people on one night we're going to illuminate an architectural element of the building. And so we illuminated the chimneys, the 5 chimneys, and then we asked people, this was Justin Fahmy, we asked them to send in their photos, and you never know what you're gonna get. We got hundreds of photos of people who took pictures of the illumination project, but it kind of gives you a different perspective. And then we have a lot of publications. We have a magazine, and then we've got floor plans, and then I worked with Google very, very early on. But we did a trivia game with Google, Talk to Water Tower Place. We're redeveloping it right now, so if you have a Google Assistant, you can say, talk to Water Tower Place. It takes you back to the 1970s. It's a multiple choice quiz game show, and you're scored and everything. But it was another way for us to share the history of the building. I took 2 pictures this morning because we've been talking about this particular project. Are you familiar with Holmes Hardware Building? It's at the end of Union. Well, we are really excited because it's going to reopen on April 14th. The upper 2 floors are affordable housing, and the lower floor is a European-style food hall, seating for 150, and there are 5 entrepreneur restaurateurs who are going to have their own mini kitchens. So if you know Bingo Burger, Rich Warner and his wife Mary Oreskovich, who used to have Hopscotch, Diavolo Chicken. They're doing a special Diavolo Chicken. We've got Mosh Ramen. We've got a vegetarian, vegan. We have Asian dumplings. And we have 1 more. I don't know why I can't remember. There's 5. But the whole goal is opening a restaurant is probably one of the worst ideas. It's a brutal industry. But this is a special project where you come in as an entrepreneur, food entrepreneur. It's like an incubator program. You waive all of those capital investments. You open up your shop, and you can stay there for up to 2 years. And during that 2-year period, you will learn about your product. You will learn about what works and what doesn't work. And then after that, the organization, Fuel and Iron, it's called Fuel and Iron, the whole concept. Fuel and Iron will then help you find a brick and mortar, and they will find people who will invest in your, because you've had 2 years to perfect it. And then a new restaurateur will come in. What's wonderful about this is phase 1. Phase 2 is the Fuel Farm. It'll be the largest indoor greenhouse, organic sustainable farm in Colorado, in downtown Pueblo. It will provide all the microgreens and all the grow for all of the 5, and all the excess will go to the markets and to other distributors. That's phase 2. Phase 3, we're partnering with IndieDwell, and they're going to build another 72 housing units right around the corner. So it'll be a campus right downtown. I just took this morning, and I'm so excited because I was the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission for 4 years, and it seemed like some of these projects would never happen. And, you know, we had the pandemic, which, where did those 3 years go? But anyways, that's one, and I don't know if any of you recognize this picture, but this is Keating Junior High School. I was the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I didn't know junior high school was a thing. But this was one of the top models for junior high schools. This was built back in the mid-1920s, and it was one of the national models because junior high school wasn't always a thing. And so I was fortunate enough to go to the reading of this nomination for the National Register for Historic Places. And it was probably one of them, because sometimes those readings can be really boring. I mean, I love historic preservation. I love learning about the stories. But I never knew that junior high school was a thing. So listening to Native Americans, people that were scientists, I mean, English teachers, I mean, it was every type of profession. There's about 15 of them, and they're selected to do the readings for the nomination, and then they vote to approve. Every single one of them said it was probably, and you can get the actual application that they submitted online, because it's really powerful. But they actually, they said it was the most impactful nomination application that they had ever read, because each and every one of us has gone to junior high school. And that's a really weird time in our lives. Our bodies are doing weird things. We're just weird creatures. And so these readers were really amazing in sharing their own stories about what it was like to be in junior high school. So they could relate to the building. And it's not very often that a school like this actually gets nominated this way, but the entire first floor is all going to be commercial, retail, and then the second floor, they're going to turn them into condominiums, and then they're going to do new construction. I just bring it up because it's this notion, these buildings have been sitting around for 40, 50 years, empty, abandoned. They're all beautifully done. I mean, the architects who built these were some of the best architects in the world, sadly, and the construction is great. Now, this one did have some asbestos, so luckily that was pulled out. But I just wanted to show you that, and then I just remembered, I'm one of the co-founders of the Pueblo Star-Journal newspaper, which we reintroduced last year as a hyper-local nonprofit newspaper. And we publish monthly, and then we have a website. We have 4 podcasts now. We're really excited because our website is getting about 40,000 visitors a month, which we could not be more excited about. Also, our podcasts are really going viral. We have one that's dedicated to sports, that's weekly. We have another one called Voices of Pueblo, and the Voices of Pueblo is divided now into 2 different broadcasts. One is Pueblo Stories, Southern Colorado Stories. The other one is called 45 Degrees. These are the artists that are painting at 45 degrees on the levee mural, and they're telling us their stories. I brought the latest edition for you, if you'd like to take a copy. The cover story is on the Bridie Murphy phenomenon from the 1950s. So if any of you remember this, we're digging that all back up, and it's really amazing. So I have some in my car. I'll bring them in if you'd like a copy. But it's a fun way because local news is a community asset, and Colorado is really ahead of the game. I see Sue there, and I'm so proud the Colorado Sun. I mean, you guys, you were really the model, but local news is a community asset, and without it, it's really difficult for us to make really well-informed decisions. So Colorado and the Colorado Media Project, which we're a member of, we're really trying to, one, help each other, but also make sure that a lot of these communities, big or small, don't lose their local voice. And so I'll bring some in for you if you'd like to. It's a really good issue. The next issue, which comes out April 7th, is going to feature the Fuel and Iron story and a lot of other stories. But other than that, I have finished with my slides. So if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding meats,
Yeah.
Where did all the meat come from?
So the meat came, no. It came from the 5-state region, really. And then their sales were massive. I mean, they literally distributed both regionally, nationally, and internationally. So, but it was huge. But yeah, there are a lot of farms. In fact, when I did a program for the Fremont County Cattlemen's Association. They were amazing. And of course, all of them were connected to that plant at some point, because many of their family ranches were the suppliers for this particular plant. So, and what's amazing is in 1946, I just pulled an article, they purchased $2 million worth of regional livestock. 1946, that's like $38 million today. That's a lot of meat. So yes, it was all regional, Yes?
I see the name Keating up there.
Yeah.
Is that original? Or is that something that's been added?
Keating was added afterwards because at the time when this school, he was the superintendent of the school district at the time. And so they changed it shortly after it opened.
And that
Keating.
was in the 20s?
It was in the 20s. So I think he died shortly thereafter. He was a real champion. So it opened as the junior high school district number 20. And then shortly thereafter, they named it after him, Keating Junior High School.
Well, what strikes me is,
Yeah,
though it's I love that sort of building.
Yeah.
It has sort of a mock Greco-Roman classic.
yeah,
And Keating is the name of a character in the Fountainhead.
yep.
And I mean, that's exactly what that built.
No, you're exactly right. No, and Ayn Rand and that whole thing. No, you're absolutely right. And that was an afterthought, and that has been done, I think, 2 or 3 times. So they're going to redo that. But no, it's funny that you should pick that up because it's clearly generations have passed, time has passed. Any other questions? If not, I invite you anytime. You can reach out to your leadership if you'd like to take a tour. I live right next door, so I do them Monday through Friday. I do them on the weekends, but if you have at least 90 minutes, it takes about 90 minutes. I would probably wait until it gets a little warmer because the 3rd and 4th floors, there's a nice cross breeze and it's sometimes cooler inside. And now that we have later, it's really good time to come. So, but I encourage you, it really is a story about Southern Colorado and some extraordinary people. Yes?
Do you have a website?
Yeah, you can go to PuebloWaterTowerPlace.com. It's a huge website that I developed and that you can get information, Facebook page, social media if you're on social media. But the website is it's great. It's got a lot of information. Yeah. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Stay here.
I will.